This is Lance Gordon reading to you my book, The Philosophy of the Ananke, Part 2. If you wish a hard copy delivered by email, please go to the following: ananke1@yahoo.com. My name is Lance Gordon, and in the regarding section put free copy. And that should be enough, and I'll shoot you a copy, assuming there aren't too many that I have to respond to. Okay, now on to the book. I will be doing it differently than I did the first time because, and let me just adjust this a bit, because I was reading on the side and you couldn't really see my eyes, I guess. So it's better this way to have it on the screen. So I'll be going to the screen version in a second and then start reading for you, and let's hope this works. So I'll click on it, and here I am. Chapter 1, Searching for the Relationship of God. Existence versus relationship. So the theory of this Ananke is that we can go from the ground up, which is called inductive reasoning, from the micro to the macro, from physics to chemistry to biology to astronomy and so on and so forth, and look for the commonality in patterns to get this singular pattern or process called the Ananke that the ancient Greeks speculated. Therefore, our pursuit of understanding the universe is going to be in two parts. One might be called searching for the relationship versus existence of God. We are not going to address the existence of God for quite a while. We are basically going to see whether or not there's a singular process, which is very unusual if that's what occurs, as opposed to multiple processes, which is the way we all were trained if we had a physics class or a chemistry class or a psychology class and so on. The patterns in each one of those disciplines we thought were unrelated, and yet they are related. They're related by this Ananke, as you will find out. So let me continue the story. Chapter 1, Searching for the Relationship of God. Existence versus relationship. In the pursuit of the relationship of God to man, we can separate the investigation into two mutually exclusive parts. On the one hand, we can discuss the universal relationship of man towards the cosmos, that is to say, whether or not one relationship exists. Moreover, if it exists, then what are its properties, and how do we utilize this knowledge for our own good? On the other hand, if a relationship exists, we can then discuss the possibility that a spirit and consciousness may be associated with it. They're two different investigations. At least I've separated them into two. So we could believe in this Ananke, this process perhaps, or this higher level of patterns, without a God or with a God. Doesn't matter. So either way, it's worth seeing. Okay. For now, we will not address, in the initial chapters of the book, whether or not God exists. Our main purpose at this time is merely to investigate the possibility that a coordinated order of things might exist, and that this order might indeed have a personal impact on our everyday lives for the better, if only we knew how to follow it. Therefore, let us concern ourselves with the concept of the relationship, quote unquote. Before going on, let me say that I think with YouTube, if you subscribe or hit the subscribe button, then when I put out another one of these parts, part 2 right now, maybe part 20 in the future, you'll be notified. And I guess there's a way to control it, so this way you don't have to peruse the internet to figure out where I am if you like what I'm reading and want to follow it. Okay, on to the story again. So let us concern ourselves with the concept of, quote unquote, the relationship. An analogy follows. Let us pretend for a moment that we are all blind. Always were, always will be. Let us further imagine that we all feel the properties of an object so strong and directional that it cannot be overlooked. We set up scientific instrumentation to measure the phenomenon. We, of course, can read the results in Braille, or be told of the results by a computer voice digital translator. We note that the interaction of this object is not only directional, but that its direction converges to a single source or even quote-unquote purpose. Its directional interaction warms the skin. It seems to warm the ground. When a plant interacts with this strange relationship, it seems to grow taller than those that are not exposed to its quote-unquote light. We have gathered enough information about this strange phenomenon to give it a name. We call it quote-unquote sun. We have no doubt of its properties and the fact that these properties emerge as if they come from a single source. We are sure of the relationship, but we still have doubts about the existence of sun because we cannot see it. This story sets the stage, this analogous story sets the stage for the task at hand. We will uncover, measure, and feel the universal relationship in the coming chapters. We will be convinced of its directionality and its convergence to a single purpose. We will know that if we follow this relationship, this quote-unquote way, that our lives might very well improve and we might very well feel happier and grow taller, like the plant in the sun analogy. Yet we will not be able to see the singular source of this order. We will come close through logical reasoning to realizing and believing in the quote-unquote sun. But we will only be able to close the gap to within an inch of true. Got to get to the next page. It's not doing it. Let's see over here. Sorry about that. Oh, geez. I am not doing this well. I'm sorry. Just hold on a second. Let's see now if I can get down to the page. I cannot do it. Look at this thing. Well, there's always a glitch in these things, aren't there? Oh, there was something over there. Page 2, 3, 4. I'm getting there. Chapter 1. Okay, so I got it. I got how to do it. All right. Let me do the last sentence again, now that I know what I'm doing. We will come close through logical reasoning to realizing and believing in the sun, but we will only be able to close the gap to within an inch of true, let me click on this, belief. The reader and myself will have to jump this chasm alone. Although we will be within an inch of realizing God, it still will require a little faith in order to make the final leap, since we are, after all is said, blind. That's important. I'll be presenting evidence, and at the end of the book and updates, I really do come within an inch of realizing that there might just be a mind behind the order that we see, but I can't absolutely prove it to you. I can only show you the evidence, and it's up to us individually to jump that final leap in a form of faith until I or somebody else can close the gap even further. But I've come a long way from what is expected of us in the religions to believe in a God of some sort. When you get through with the book, you'll see what I'm talking about. Let me continue. For now, we will begin our journey into the possibility of a universal relationship by investigating the ancient religions and philosophies of 2,000 to 5,000 years ago. Let us return to the past to search for the probable truth. So what I'm going to do right now is give a very, very brief review of the 11 major religions in the world so that we have some structure as to where does this Ananke fit in. Were there elements like it somewhere in the past? Okay, a review of philosophy and religion. Before we begin our adventure, allow me to preface it with the following observation. It seems that there is a continuity in religious/philosophic thought for a given people in a given region. That is, it begins with animism, which is the prayer to animals and objects, and evolves to polytheistic nature worship that seems to classify the forces of the environment. As time goes on, these forces are coordinated into a scheme of things which relates to the society and its behavior as a whole. So, for this discussion, we will limit ourselves to those religions and philosophies that evolved beyond simplistic, non-coordinated nature worship. Those beliefs that have elements of a coordinated order to things will be examined only. Let us begin with the most ancient of all philosophic civilizations that had the elements of a religious order, quote unquote. Let us investigate the people of the Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Namely, what I'll be talking about is the Babylonian religion. The most ancient of sacred scriptures comes from the land of Babylon, nearly 5,000 years ago. In the beginning, there was demon worship, presumably derived from nomadic desert beliefs. Eventually, an advanced, near monotheistic religion evolved. At about 3000 BC, there existed a people who believed in a supreme god, Shamash. Although originally Shamash was viewed as the sun deity, the concept evolved to a heavenly power that was deeply concerned about justice and social decency. Shamash was the creator and preserver of all things. Shamash was the great judge of heaven and earth. Shamash had more power than the other sub-gods that they speculated, sub-gods. The Babylonians' relationship with the supreme being was relatively simple. Shamash was to be feared and respected. It was believed that good deeds would bring forth rewards, that evil would bring forth punishment, that Shamash would deliver justice based on a person's behavior here on earth. They believed that a peaceful society could be achieved through a fair and just ruler. This king would interpret Shamash's, quote, order of justice and apply the results to his kingdom. An example of this application was the rule of the great king of Babylonia, Hammurabi. At about 2100 BC, the great king Hammurabi attempted to advance the welfare of the people by describing 282 ordinances, which became the law. The laws were engraved in a huge stone monument for all to see and obey. This was indeed the first systematic attempt at written law, the law or code of Hammurabi. Although this civilization thrived, there is no direct evidence in the belief of an order. Indirectly, we can view their emphasis on justice and their interpreted causation of deed to reward/punishment as a first attempt at describing a moral order. Nevertheless, their belief in a supreme heavenly power does tend to point in a positive direction for our research. As an interesting side note, one begins to observe a strange similarity between the Jewish beliefs and the early Babylonians. The early stories in the Bible, namely the creation, the flood, and the like, all have counterparts in the Babylonian scriptures. Moreover, the early Babylonians had a day of bad luck. People tended not to work during that day of the week for that reason. The less they did, the less bad luck that could happen. They called this day the Shabbatim. Of course, this is conspicuously close to the Jewish holy day of rest, the Shabbat, the Sabbath. As a last correlation, we must observe the similarities of the ancient Babylonian beliefs with respect to the Egyptians. As you will see, they also believed initially in a sun god, Ra. Eventually, they conceived of a heavenly power that was above Ra and the other sub-gods. Again, we have sub-gods. As in the case of Shamash, this heavenly power had one of its primary virtues, justice. So now on to Egypt. The Egyptian Memphite theology, or Memphite theology. At about 2400 BC, 4400 years ago, a vizier, the highest official in the land of Egypt, was buried in a great tomb, a pyramid. The writings in the tomb describe the old kingdom as a place where life was great, where justice prevailed, and where a strong belief existed in the supreme god Ptah, P-T-A-H, for you spelling. I may be pronouncing it wrong. The city was the capital of Egypt, the town of Memphis, the city of one supreme god. The Memphitic theology was optimistic and dominated the Egyptian mind for at least the next 1,000 years. Let us try to understand the power of this great Egyptian cosmology. First of all, their conception of Ptah was that he was the one primal god who created all things by a mere thought, tongue, as they would say, which came into its mind or spirit, heart, as they would say. This heart/mind/spirit was Ptah himself. Ptah, by divine thought, created a divine order of things, which had as its highest pattern the necessity of justice. This supreme God also created and transmitted power to the sub-gods so that they could carry out his divine order. Moreover, it was understood that Pita was in all things, including the sub-gods, men, women, animals, and particles. Their relationship with Pita was simple. This power and its sub-gods spoke to the Egyptian people through their sole representative, the pharaoh. In turn, the pharaoh was considered the son of the god Ra, the sun god which was created by Pita. The pharaoh communicated to all the gods by thought transmission. When the time was right, received divine inspiration as to how to rule his people better. He was God's, quote, caretaker, with the responsibility of improving the lives of his people. In essence, the pharaoh was the sub-god of the Egyptians in a similar manner to the other sub-gods who were responsible for maintaining the order of Pita in the physical world. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining and creating the order of Pita as it applied to human affairs. The way that the pharaoh created this order was through the reception of divine inspiration and the mere utterance of his tongue. Thereafter, the orders were carried out through an elaborate scheme of individual Egyptian specialists, again mimicking Pita's division of responsibility to his sub-gods. Above all, the order had to maintain the major pattern of Mayat. Again, I may be pronouncing that wrong. I've heard it called Mat, M-A'-A-T, Mat, defined as divine justice. Pita related to all men in the following manner. Pita decreed that all men had the right to wind and water, and that he made every man like his fellow man. Moreover, although the pharaoh was Pita's sub-god, any man who transgressed the rules of the order, including the pharaoh, was accountable directly to Pita and to his own ka, or soul. As long as man obeyed the order of Pita, life would be wonderful, as it apparently was back then, and should be relished and enjoyed by all Egyptians. In summary, the old kingdom of Egypt was ruled by an extremely just group of pharaohs who promoted Pita's order, which achieved peace and harmony among the Egyptian people. The peace, harmony, and justice precipitated a way of life full of joy and happiness for all. This way of life was so relished by the people that they wished to take its joys into the next world. Their concept of an afterlife reflected this. It was believed that upon death your ka, soul, faced the tribunal of the sub-gods. The sub-gods weighed the quality of your heart, mind or spirit, with respect to Mayat, justice. If you performed more good deeds toward Mayat in life than bad deeds away from Mayat, then eternal blessedness and a continuing of the good life would be yours forever. I'm looking at a clock because I'm trying to keep these 30 minutes, incidentally. Okay, Judaism. Although the people of Israel date back to near 3000 BC, in Semitic tribal beliefs, it is not until Moses, circa 1200 BC, that the philosophy of this great people is crystallized into the Torah. It is at this point that it becomes appropriate to mention a strange correlation between the Jewish philosophy and the Egyptian Metaphysic theology. It seems that at the time of Moses, the old kingdom of Egypt was becoming corrupt. This was primarily due to invasions by neighboring nations and the consequent delegation of power to borderline governors. These governors started warring among themselves for more power. Consequently, corruption and injustice began to show its ugly head. Amidst this environment was born an apparent son of a pharaoh, Moses, obviously. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, we must assume that Moses was trained in the religious ways of the Metaphysic theology. He was taught the belief in one supreme God that was extremely just, and that by following the way of this God, one could achieve the happy, joyous life of the ancient old kingdom of the past. He was also taught that each family had its own sub-god, that's kind of interesting, that protected it as an orderly entity in and of itself. That this sub-god essentially chose this family to protect as long as the family obeyed Pita's order. It is an unusual coincidence that the main virtues of Judaism happen to be an extreme optimism regarding life and an equally extreme emphasis on justice and the good deed, the mitzvah. Moreover, it is extremely intriguing that the God of the Jews chose them in a similar manner to the Memphitic subgods, as they chose other family units. Everybody had a god, I guess. I will leave the ultimate logic to the reader and the interested historians among you, but for now, let us talk about the Jewish philosophy as an independent view of nature and man. At about 1200 BC, 3,200 years ago, Moses was born. He became the leader of the Jewish people and brought them out of Egypt to start a new way of life, a way of justice, a way of peace, and a way to believe in a supreme spirit, Jehovah. Jehovah was perceived as being a oneness of spirit which created and preserved our universe. They believed that all life was given by Jehovah and was therefore good and should be revered. That man was created with a mortal body and an immortal soul which was ruled by two impulses, one good, the other evil. The belief was dominant that man was born with a free will to choose between the two, and that God would be the judge as to how well he made the choices. This, quote, judgment determined the nature of a man's afterlife. Heaven, or Gehenna, which was the Jewish word for hell. It was further believed that a happy and joyous life could be achieved by following the Ten Commandments and the law of Moses. This law taught above all else the cardinal virtues of justice and charity. It was taught that one learned the way of God through studying the holy books, and if at all possible, interpreting them as literally as could be expected. When concepts were unclear, the meaning was interpreted by a group of rabbis through scholarly debate. The holy books were considered accurate and not to be changed. It is felt by the author, me, that major objections usually resulted in new religions being formed, such as Christianity, Mohammedanism, and Zoroastrianism. Lastly, on the concept of an afterlife, it was felt that man who chose the good impulses to follow would ascend to his maker in heaven, that heaven was neither up nor down, but in the heart, and was reached through good deeds and following the good way. On the other hand, the soul of the evil man descended to Gehenna, hell, where punishment was received for the sins committed. When cleansed, the purified soul ascended to heaven. Eventually, a Messiah would appear on earth who would establish God's kingdom, where all good souls would live joyously in peace and harmony forever. In the author's opinion, my opinion, God's kingdom is very reminiscent of the old kingdom of Egypt 4,400 years ago, where justice and peace prevailed for all mankind. At this point, I want to check the time on the things. I don't want to go over 30 minutes. We may have to come back and make it part 3. Right now, we're at 23 minutes. So